BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your sports betting action. With baseball season in full swing, and BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are still being played. We keep the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, with updated odds on Major League Baseball, UFC, and boxing, to tennis, and NFL futures. BetOnline remains the best online source for all of your sports wagering information. In between games, just head on over to the BetOnline casino with all of the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengals podcast. Yours truly, Solomon Wilcots. And once again, we are joined by our Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith, on the show today. And Charlie, good to see you. How about this, man? First day of training camp. You and I get to record and talk Bengals. What's your first impression as the Bengals now start to matriculate in, all except maybe one?
Yeah, we'll talk about all the news and the changes and the this and the that. But, you know, my biggest takeaway from today, real physical practice. There were some hits. Yeah. A couple guys maybe even stepped over the line a bit too much. But there was certainly a bit of a different energy level that you saw today.
Yeah, this Cincinnati Bengals training camp has tremendous storylines. I think it's a really good football team. We're going to get to talk about that in the days to come. But I wanted to start by having a conversation about what Mike Brown has to say about where the really the negotiations are right now with their first-round pick, Shemar Stewart. Because when he spoke about some of the language now that we know that's in the contract, it's about conduct detrimental to the team. And he gave us a little bit more insight about it. And he said, hypothetically speaking, if the behavior rises to the level of going to jail, we don't want to be stuck paying a player guaranteed money if the infraction rises to that level. Now, he did say hypothetically, but there was just, to me, there was a lot of negative connotations there. And it let us know where Mike Brown truly stands. And where the Bengals stand, they don't seem even close to backing down.
There was a very consistent thread from Mike Brown to maybe not as much Zach Taylor, kind of stayed away from it, but definitely Duke Tobin, the director of player personnel as well. And Duke's line stood out a ton to me when he said, Shemar is listening to the advice that he's paying for. And let's unpack that line a bit. Yes. The fact that he's paying for what Duke clearly views as bad advice, that's a shot at Shemar. The most pointed shots were towards his agency. That has one, dug in, two, been vocal publicly, and three, tried to take the type of over-aggressive stance that you haven't seen another rookie take in the NFL. So clearly there was some, silliness was Mike Brown's other term, aimed at what they view the strategy of Shemar's side is, blaming it more on the agents. But then how can you not throw some of that criticism at Shemar as well, which is what they were doing? Not that that's what they should be doing, but that's what they were doing by saying that he's paying for bad advice.
Yeah, and also I'm going to try to give some perspective that I don't think the Bengals did when they spoke when they made themselves available to the media. And I think our Bengals fans and all NFL fans should know that the Bengals aren't like pulling this out of nowhere. And I don't know that if it's properly applied to deciding to do this now with Shemar Stewart, something they did not do when they signed Jamar Chase to his contract or T. Higgins to his contract or any of the other first-round picks. Remember, there was a player by the name of Henry Ruggs who was taken in the really top portion. He was the first wide receiver, some good players at that position, taken in the 2020 draft. It was the very next year that he was arrested for vehicular homicide and was convicted in 2023 of vehicular homicide. You should know that he was paid by the Raiders his fully guaranteed contract. Now, I'm sure some of that money was voided because, let's face it, the collective bargaining agreement does cover some of this, that it protects the teams against paying out fully guaranteed money when you violate the personal conduct policy. So when Mike Brown says if the behavior rises to the level of a player going to jail, we shouldn't have to pay for all of that. I think what he left out is that this is already covered in the collective bargaining agreement, that the Bengals are adding additional language. I'm not saying that I blame them, but I think if the agent and the player was talking and speaking more clearly, they would say it's already covered in the collective bargaining agreement. We don't need to add any additional language. And I do Bleav that the Bengals are dug in. And I think right now it's up to Zach Hiller, the agent for Shemar Stewart, and for Shemar to say, okay, we'll give you that one, but here's what we want in exchange, because that's called a negotiation. But I think right now both sides have issued statements, so neither side can blame the other for speaking out and talking, because both sides have done it. That's okay. You have your right to do that. But I think right now the ball is in Shemar Stewart's court and in his agent's court to say, here's what we want. And I think this is just Solomon Wilcots talking. It says, okay, you want a language in there that takes away some of the guaranteed money. I want more specific language. If you say if I go to jail or convicted of a crime, okay, fine. Here's what I want. I want more of what money is guaranteed up front. I don't want to put it on a schedule. I don't want to wait till the end of the year. I don't want you to put it in escrow and make interest off the money you already owe me. I want it all right now. How about that? And so my point is, this does not have to be a stalemate as long as both sides want to negotiate. And I do want to make it clear that some of the things we heard Mike Brown say, that language is already in the collective bargaining agreement. If a player is convicted of a crime, he's automatically violated the personal conduct policy, which you and I both know makes some of the money not guaranteed.
A part of this too is we're in a year, in a multi-year window, in an era, a mini era where there's just a lot of effort on both sides to evolve contract structures, to update contract structures, to change precedents. Yes. And this, what you're seeing with Shemar, is represented by several other examples around the league where you've seen, not to call it haggling, and I don't mean haggling in a negative way, but haggling is negotiating. Haggling and negotiating over these very, very minor detailed terms, these terms, this structure, this guarantee, all of that goes on. It's just the reason I bristle at the word minor is when it keeps you from getting a deal done, it's not minor.
It's not that minor.
So this is a perfect example of where it's something minor, but obviously critically important because of the precedent it sets becoming something major.
And I do want to also add in, if you think that Shemar is getting bad advice, you should also know that players, NFL players who have agents, they do get second opinions. And typically the second opinion comes from the players' union. They're able to call their union and say, what did the guy in my position last year who was selected 17th overall, how much of his money was guaranteed? They're going to say all of it. How much did he get up front in signing bonus? They're going to give him the percentages. And they're going to say, okay, what is the compromise? As a union, as a league, what are we trying to get done here? Where do you think I should settle? Am I getting bad advice? Because it's not for the team to say the player's getting bad advice. Of course he would say that, right? But I do think it's up to the player to get a second opinion like he would a medical decision. When the team says, go with our doctor in this medical procedure, I'm not taking the team's word for that either. I'm getting a second opinion. And I do Bleav when it comes to negotiations, if Shemar Stewart were listening to me now, I'm not saying don't trust your agent, Zach Hiller. I'm saying be smart and go get a second opinion. Call the NFL Players Association, call the office and ask, what are the other things we should be looking at? How strategically are we approaching this? What more can we ask for? If we give them this, what they seem to really want, what the Bengals really want, what should we expect to get in return? That is well above board. And I think it's one of the next steps that Shemar Stewart should take, Charlie.
Here's the saddest part about all this. The saddest part about all this is at some point, Shemar's one way or another going to show up and play football, whether he gets what he's looking for, whether there's compromise, whether there's negotiation, or one way or another. I don't see Shemar Stewart sitting out the year and re-entering the 2026 draft. So Shemar's going to play for the 2025 Bengals, and there's just going to be all of this stuff simmering around a young kid who's trying to have a good rookie season and make a name for himself. And all this conversation, like we, not you and me, but we, everybody, we've stopped talking about Shemar, the player, and the pass rush moves he needs to add, and whether he can kick inside, and how he holds up against the run, and how many snaps he's going to play, and when you rotate him in. We talk about none of that. Now there's just all of this stuff around him, and it's something he's going to be carrying with him now for the rest of his career, this sticking memory of how his NFL career started. And that part, I do believe, is a bit unfortunate.
I think Shemar Stewart is stuck at a crossroads, at a intersect point where this stance the Bengals are taking is part of a much broader perspective that many NFL owners and the league itself, you and I both know, are taking when it comes to guaranteed money due to players. Because I could argue and say that the Bengals have a really excellent point. And I think everyone would agree you don't want to pay a player if he's sitting in jail, as Mike Brown says. No one wants to see a team. No one in business would agree with paying an employee who's been arrested, sitting in jail, because you promised that his money's guaranteed that you would pay him. Again, I say this, that's already covered by the collective bargaining agreement. It really is. Secondly, I think the Bengals have a point. Let's just say Henry Ruggs, his arrest in 2021 gives them precedence for saying we need to be careful about guaranteeing fully the contract of players selected in the first round. We need to be more discriminating because these calamities, and I'm only using the example Mike Brown described of a player getting arrested sitting in jail, it could happen. But if that was a greater concern, then why didn't they do it the next year in 2021? Why they didn't do it after Henry Ruggs was convicted in 2023? Why they didn't do it in 2024? I just only say, why now? If that's a real fear, if that is a real concern, it's not closely attached to the great example that we have. So I would have to say that they're being spurred and pushed on by something else that's part of this. And I would offer up, given the collusion grievance that was filed by the NFL Players Association, that the arbitrator ruled that there was evidence of collusion, but it didn't raise to a high enough level to find the owners culpable of collusion, and it kind of went away. So they ruled in the owner's favor. I think we found that the NFL Players Association and their recent executive director who resigned, Lloyd Howell, kept it secret, kept it under wraps. I would tell NFL fans and Bengals fans specifically, before you cast blame on Shemar Stewart or his agent, I'm telling you, there's a lot of smoke here and the smoke hasn't cleared. And a lot of it is attached to guaranteed contracts. And I think that's where Shemar Stewart is so unfortunate. The timing of this, Charlie, has aligned imperfectly for him in that way.
And again, the tough part of just the timing is you lost the buffer in the negotiating window of the offseason because it took this long and there were so many hurdles that were created by each side in this process. You had months to negotiate this, and you've now completely lost that advantage. And the hope was that a deadline of training camp would make a deal, but clearly the issues themselves were more important to these parties than the deadline. And that's, again, a reflection, like you say, of the changing tides we're seeing in different areas in the NFL. And again, in the short term right now, it's just costing the Bengals, and it's costing Shemar as well.
It's costing them both. This, to me, and I'll leave it here, looks like mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction. That's like not a good thing for either side, as you well know. I think it can compromise the growth and development of the player, which ultimately compromises the lost days of productivity. It hurts the team. I mean, it really does. Now, I think the team could say, it hurts him. Oh, he's a young player. He could be great. And I think the player can say, it's going to hurt the team. Yeah, it'll hurt me, but it's going to hurt the team because we need it. We're needed. The player is needed here. Let's go to another player who's so much needed this upcoming season, and that's Trey Hendrickson. Last reporting, what comes to mind now that you know he has left Cincinnati? He has not reported to training camp with the rest of his teammates, and you and I both know Trey wants to be in training camp. He wants to be on that practice field.
Everything that Trey has been told by the Bengals is a reflection of, in his estimation, how little they value him. When Trey is out here saying they're not willing to give me guarantees past a certain point, they're not viewing me at the top of the edge rusher market compared to this guy, compared to that guy, all that Trey is understandably hearing is that he's not valued. Now, what is Trey's value? That's a whole different conversation, but how he feels is legitimate and significant and is relevant enough to drive him literally from Cincinnati to Florida. That's how Trey feels right now. And so much of these negotiations are really the how these processes get handled between teams and established veteran stars, which Trey is, comes down to feel and respect. And those seem to both be at a low point for Hendrickson right
now. I want to say this because every time I hear this term or this quote that you don't pay for past production, we're going to pay you for what you're doing in the future. You and I both know it's a load of malarkey. There is no economic model known to man where you discard past production in the equation. Whatever economic formula that you use to predict future performance, future value, you're using past production. You're using past value. It's going to go in the equation to try to determine what that future number looks like. Because in that sense, future production, future performance is what we call an X factor. It's an unknown factor in the equation. And so the only thing you really have to go by is what a person has done in the past. You're going to factor in age, right? You're going to throw those things in. And I don't know that 30 years of age is what it used to be in the NFL. We don't practice twice a day. There's no longer 2 a days. The game isn't as physical. The wear and tear on players isn't as great, even though you play one more game each season now. Players take better care of themselves. The science around health and nutrition is so much better. So I think you have to use all that to be baked into the formula. But when I hear Danielle Hunter, who's close in age, getting close to, $35 to $40 million a year, TJ Watt, who's 30 years of age, getting $41 million a year, guaranteed $108 million. That's over the next 3 years. And now Trey Hendrickson can't even come close. You can go back to The Wealth of Nations written by Adam Smith, and he'll tell you past production matters. Don't let anyone tell you we're not paying for past production. We're paying for the future because past production, it factors in the equation, Charlie.
But now what is past production? And we've had this conversation before. You're much higher on Trey Hendrickson's 2024 season than I was. Mm-hmm. The sack number is a beautiful line on the resume, and you want to give Trey all of the credit for the 17 sacks he had. But most of those were against bad tackles and worse quarterbacks. A lot of the winning plays last season, Hendrickson was doing something, a lot of the biggest high leverage plays of last season, Hendrickson was doing something more negative. When you look at his inability to get quick pressures and especially sacks against the best quarterbacks, The Bengals as a whole have prioritized pressures and quick pressures more than sacks. When you look at why they like Shemar Stewart so much, even though he only had 4.5 sacks in college. When you look at the way they've bought into Myles Murphy, who had pressures last year, but not sacks. You talk about pass production, and yes, Trey might have even led the league in pressures. But when you look at when those pressures happened and how often they were quick pressures, was enough production there to Bleav any of this was sustainable? That's my question. Yes, pass production matters, but what type of production was it and when did the production happen? I think is still important context that you have to evaluate into the pie.
I do think time, like early phase of the play, providing pressure versus the second phase and third phase of the play. Now, if that's where the lion's share of your pressures have come, then, a lot of us like to call it, for lack of a better way, of garbage sack, right? Late in games where teams in must-throw situations. I get it. But if you're telling me the sack came against this player versus that player, they're all NFL players, Charlie. I'm sorry. Like, do you grade a cornerback because he intercepted Joe Burrow as opposed to intercepting, say, Justin Fields? Are you giving more credit to that interception because it came against Pat Mahomes? No, we don't do it. But I get it. I mean, I get what we're doing here. Sometimes I think this is where you and I know data analytics, where I do subscribe to it. I get it. I do think you can start to pick some metrics to downgrade your talent if that's what you're trying to do.
That's fair. That's a good point.
And I do think you can pick some metrics to upgrade your talent if that's what you're trying to do. And I think that's where I think we've crossed the Rubicon here on Trey Hendrickson, because I think there are a lot of people running around in Cincinnati Bengals front office who are using metrics to try to downgrade his production. And I can tell you right now, if you feel that way, why didn't you trade him?
Yeah,
they don't want to trade him, do they? You and I both know they don't want to trade him. And if they did, they would ask for the real proper value. They would want the first round picks. They would want a player. That's how they really feel about him. But when it comes to stroking that check, they've used a different set of metrics. That's the part of what's unfair. And I'm telling you now, it's very unfair in how they're treating Trey Hendrickson in this negotiation. The two things aren't comparable.
They've messed this up. The Bengals, like you said it perfectly. The Bengals use a lot to describe what Trey Hendrickson isn't. But then when he was available on the trade market, they said, well, here's what he is.
Here's what he is.
There hasn't been an alignment in
that's right.
In kind of those both sides and those different sides. And this loops back to the guaranteed money. If you weren't interested in giving Hendrickson guaranteed money past this year, that's a signal that Hendrickson isn't in your plans past this season.
That's right.
Well, then trade him. Use $16 million to get, or $20 million that you open up to get someone who isn't in your plans for multiple years, and then also add a pick somewhere there in the fold. So that's the disconnect that didn't add up and where the Bengals, I think, went wrong.
And look, you and I both know, it seems like when the team speaks, it's like a wool comes over the eyes of the fans and everyone's like, whoa. And you and I just like to come here and try to provide some nuance and new way of seeing the same problem and try to give a fair and balanced account of things as we see it based on the knowledge and the research and the homework that we have done. Now that the Bengals are in training camp, I want to know from you, what's new? What's reliable? What excites you about this year's training camp, and what concerns you, Charlie?
Got a lot of concerns.
Okay.
We all saw this defense last season. What excites me, like today, what I spent a lot of time doing was I just watched the defensive backs during individual drills. Yeah. They're doing completely new drills. They're doing all these rotations now. It's a much quicker moving practice. It's a much more hyper-specific technique. Let's work on this and then use this in this way on the field when we run this play type of practice. And then they're moving these guys around, in the slot, out wide, different responsibilities, taking advantage of that versatility. That dynamic is really cool. Now, it'll work. Let's see. We'll get back to you in 5 months. But there are some ideas here. And that to me is very compelling for a defense that does have talent.
Yeah, it is. I think they have a lot of talent. It's just about how well would the talent perform. I'm still of this mindset. Trey Hendrickson, Shemar Stewart are the two most important players on this defense because pressure leads to picks. This is coming from a former defensive back, right? I'm telling you, pressure leads to picks. In our league, where most of the teams, last year, by the way, 31 of the 32 teams threw the ball more than they passed it, Charlie. Okay? only the Eagles ran the ball more than 50% of the time. In a league where they're throwing it more than they're running it, you need pressure on the quarterback. And the two guys that are expected to deliver that pressure, Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson. Yeah, Miles Murphy and some of the other guys. But those are the two most important guys. And right now, they're not in Bengals training camp. You and I got lots more to talk about. I know we've run out of time, but I look forward to coming back with you here again next week for a significant update on contract negotiations and what we're seeing from Bengals training camp. He is Charlie Goldsmith. I'm Solomon Wilcox. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Bleav in Bengals podcast.